The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung.
Have you ever noticed how some people have an almost supernatural magnetism? They don't shout to be heard. They don't bend over backwards with endless explanations. They don't beg for comprehension. They simply exist. And somehow, the world revolves around them. Everyone wants to know what they're thinking, what they're doing, why they made that decision. And while you spend hours justifying every move you make, they remain silent and command everyone's attention. Now imagine if you did the same. If you stopped explaining yourself, justifying yourself, begging for understanding in every conversation, what do you think would happen? I'll tell you exactly what happens. Because this is the fundamental difference between those who command respect and those who beg for it. When you stop explaining yourself, you force the world to interpret you. And when people need to interpret you, you become infinitely more interesting than when you deliver everything preached. Carl Jung once said that everything we cannot accept in ourselves becomes our shadow. And one of the biggest shadows we carry is this compulsive need to be understood, accepted, validated by every person who crosses our path. But let me ask you a question that'll cut deep. How many times have you lost someone's respect precisely because you explained yourself too much? How many times have you felt that the more you talked, the less seriously they took you? This happens because excessive explanation is read by the human brain as weakness, as insecurity, as lack of conviction. And the world doesn't respect what isn't sure of itself. Since childhood, you've been conditioned to explain everything. At school, you had to justify your answers. At home, you needed to account for every action. In society, you learned that being understood is fundamental to belonging. But here's the truth no one told you. This constant need for explanation isn't virtue. It's addiction. An addiction that makes you predictable, disposable, and worse yet, manipulable. Because when you feel you need to explain every thought, every decision, every movement, you're handing control of the narrative to the other person. You're putting your self-esteem in the hands of someone who may or may not choose to understand you. And that's where the danger lies, because not everyone deserves an explanation. In fact, most people don't deserve one. You explain out of anxiety, not necessity. You explain because you're afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being alone. But I'll reveal something that will change your perspective forever. People respect more what they cannot completely decipher. There's a deep psychological reason for this. The human brain is programmed to pursue what is scarce, what is mysterious, what requires effort to be conquered. When you explain yourself too much, you become abundant, obvious, easy to categorize. And everything that's easy to categorize instantly loses value. Think about the people who impacted you most in life. Were they those who told the whole story, or those who left you curious, wanting to know more? Were they the ones who justified themselves with every word, or those who spoke little, but when they spoke, you paid attention? The answer is obvious, but hard to accept. And why is it hard? Because accepting this means admitting you've been using the wrong strategy your entire life. There's something in human nature that attracts us to mystery. That's why movies don't reveal the ending in the trailer. That's why magnetic people don't tell their entire story on the first meeting. That's why the most respected leaders speak in short sentences and leave others trying to decipher what they really think. Mystery creates mental space. When you don't deliver everything pre-chewed, the other person's mind needs to work to understand you. And this mental work creates emotional investment. The more someone needs to think about you, the more important you become in that person's life. It's basic psychology, but applied in a revolutionary way. Now, compare this to what you normally do. You tell your whole story, explain every motivation, justify every decision. You remove all mystery, all need for interpretation. And when you do this, the other person's mind stops working to understand you. You become obvious. And what's obvious is quickly forgotten. Think about how many people you know who talk too much, who constantly explain themselves. They might even be intelligent, but they're forgettable because they don't leave space for you to be curious about them. They deliver everything, and when you have everything, there's nothing left to discover. Jung understood that the human psyche functions like an energy system. Every word you speak, Every explanation you give, every justification you offer consumes psychic energy. And when you spend that energy trying to control how others perceive you, you become exhausted, anxious, emotionally drained, because you're fighting an impossible battle, trying to control another person's mind. But there's a different path. Instead of trying to control how they perceive you, you can simply stop caring. Instead of explaining your actions, you can let your actions speak for themselves. Instead of justifying your decisions, you can simply live their consequences with dignity. And when you do this, something magical happens. People start projecting meanings onto you. They start creating narratives about who you are, what you think, why you act a certain way. And these projections, invariably, are more interesting than any explanation you could give, because people tend to attribute depth, mystery, and intelligence to what they cannot completely comprehend. That's why authentic leaders speak little and listen much. That's why magnetic people are economical with words. They understood that well-positioned silence is worth more than 1,000 desperate explanations. With every unnecessary explanation you give, you dilute your presence. With every justification you offer without being asked, you diminish your authority. Every time you bend over backwards to be understood, you become more common, more predictable, more dispensable. But there's something even deeper happening here. When you constantly explain yourself, you're transmitting a subliminal message. I need your approval to feel valid. And this message is instantly captured by the subconscious of whoever listens to you. What happens when you meet someone truly powerful? Someone who has success, influence, real presence. You notice that this person doesn't explain themselves. They affirm, they decide, they act. And when you ask questions, they respond economically, without bending over backwards with unnecessary details. Why? Because powerful people understand that excessive explanation transmits need, and need transmits weakness. They learn that real power doesn't shout, doesn't justify itself, doesn't beg for attention. Real power simply is. And when you're in the presence of someone like this, you feel it. You automatically respect them, even if you don't understand exactly why. It's because this person masters the language of true power, communication through presence, not through desperate words. And here's the crucial point. You can develop this same presence, but it requires you to fundamentally change how you relate to the need for approval. Most people live in an invisible prison, where every action is calculated to generate the least possible amount of conflict or misunderstanding. They explain themselves because they're afraid of disapproval. They're afraid of being judged, rejected, abandoned. But this desperate attempt to avoid judgment is exactly what guarantees they'll be judged negatively. Because desperate behavior generates contempt, not compassion. Have you noticed how manipulators operate? They don't explain themselves. They make you explain yourself. They remain enigmatic while you bend over backwards with justifications. And why? Because they discover that whoever explains more is whoever has less power in the dynamic. I'll tell you a secret that toxic people know intuitively. The more you explain yourself to someone, the more power you give that person over you. Because every explanation is a disguised request for approval. It's you saying, please understand me. Please accept me. Please don't reject me. And opportunistic people can sense this desperation from miles away. They know you need their approval, so they use it against you. They make you explain more, justify more, humiliate yourself more. Because every additional explanation is a demonstration that you need them more than they need you. But when you stop explaining yourself, the game flips. When you offer your opinions without justifying them. When you make decisions without asking for emotional permission. When you act without apologizing for existing, you break this cycle of dependency. And then they're the ones who start explaining themselves. Because now they need to understand you, and you're no longer available to facilitate this process. Your emotional unavailability forces them to work, to have access to your mind, and work generates value. Value generates respect. Respect generates attraction. It's a completely different cycle, where you're no longer begging for attention, but commanding it naturally. But this requires something most people don't have: Courage to be misunderstood. Courage to let others have negative opinions about you without trying to change them through desperate explanations. There's a fascinating psychological phenomenon called cognitive scarcity. When something is abundant and easily available, our brain automatically decreases the value attributed to that thing. When something is scarce and difficult to obtain, we automatically increase the value. This applies to everything, from products to people. When you're always available to explain, justify, clarify any misunderstanding, you become cognitively abundant. People know they can always have total access to your mind, your motivations, your intentions, and this abundance makes them value you less, even unconsciously. On the other hand, when you become selective with your explanations, when you're not always available to clarify every point, you become cognitively scarce. People start valuing more the moments when you really open up, because they know these moments are rare and precious. It's exactly how it works with anything valuable in life. Gold is valuable because it's scarce. Diamonds are expensive because they're rare. Your attention, your explanations, your emotional availability follow the same economic logic. The more abundant you make them, the less value they have. The more scarce, the more precious they become. But most people do the opposite. They flood the market with their explanations, becoming so common they go unnoticed. It's like a singer who plays on the street every day at the same corner. Eventually, people stop noticing. Even if he's talented, abundance kills impact. But here's the hardest part. Stopping explaining yourself goes against all your social instincts. You'll feel guilt. You'll think you're being rude, arrogant, insensitive, because you were conditioned to believe you owe constant satisfaction to the world. But let me ask you a liberating question. Since when do you owe an explanation of your life to people who contribute nothing to it? Since when did your personal decisions become public property that needs to be justified? The truth is, you don't owe an explanation to anyone except yourself. And when you internalize this deeply, a radical transformation happens in how people perceive and treat you. You stop being a supporting character in other people's lives and become the protagonist of your own story. But attention. Stopping explaining yourself doesn't mean being rude or disrespectful. It means being selective. It means choosing when, how, and to whom you open your mind. It means understanding that not every question deserves an answer. Not every criticism deserves defense. Not every opinion deserves consideration. It's about emotional sovereignty. It's about governing your internal world without needing external approval to validate your decisions. And this sovereignty, when genuine, is perceived by everyone around you as a form of power that cannot be broken or manipulated, because it doesn't depend on anything external to exist. Let me tell you something that changed my perspective forever. Observe the people you admire most, whether in your personal life or public figures you respect. You'll notice a pattern. They don't constantly explain themselves. When they make a decision, they don't spend 10 minutes justifying why they made it. When they express an opinion, they don't bend over backwards with disclaimers and preventive explanations. They simply are authentic and assume the consequences of that authenticity. And that's exactly why we respect them. Because there's something deeply attractive about someone who doesn't need constant validation to exist. There's something magnetic about a person who is comfortable being misunderstood if it means maintaining their integrity. Now, think about the people who inspire you least. Those who talk too much, who constantly justify themselves, who can't make a decision without explaining every variable they considered. Even if they're intelligent, even if they have good intentions, there's something weakening about their presence. It's the weight of the constant need for approval. It's the energy they drain trying to control how you perceive them. And you can feel this energy, even if you can't articulate exactly what bothers you about them. The difference between these two types of people is simple. One explains themselves to the world. The other lets the world interpret them. One lives defensively. The other lives offensively. One begs for comprehension. The other commands respect. Jung spoke about the process of individuation, the path to becoming who you really are, free from social masks and expectations. And a crucial part of this process is learning to exist without needing constant external validation. When you stop compulsively explaining yourself, you force people to deal with you as you are, not as they want you to be. And this quickly separates those who truly value you from those who just used you as a mirror for their own insecurities. The people who get irritated when you stop explaining yourself are exactly those who benefited from your desperation for approval. They liked having you as an emotional hostage, always available to justify, always anxious to please, always willing to diminish yourself to fit their expectations. But when you withdraw this availability, when you become emotionally inaccessible to manipulation games, they lose control over you, and this makes them desperate. They start provoking you, questioning you, trying to force you back to the old pattern. But if you resist, if you maintain your new posture, something extraordinary happens. You become magnetic, because now you're a mystery to be deciphered, not an open book to be ignored. And here's a secret few understand. People don't fall in love with those they can completely control. They fall in love with those who challenge them, who aren't completely available, who maintain some mystery even after years of relationship. There's also an energy economy issue that needs to be considered. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you're spending precious mental and emotional energy. Energy that could be used to create, to grow, to build something meaningful. But instead, you waste it trying to micromanage others' perceptions of you. It's like trying to control the weather. You can spend all your energy trying, but in the end, you have no real control over the outcome. The difference is that, unlike the weather, you can simply choose to stop caring so much about others' perceptions. And when you make this choice, something liberating happens. You recover all this energy that was being wasted and can direct it toward things that really matter, toward your goals, your genuine relationships, your personal growth. It's like taking an enormous weight off your shoulders. Suddenly, you realize you were carrying the impossible burden of trying to be understood by everyone, all the time, in all circumstances. And this burden wasn't just heavy, it was unnecessary, because the truth is that even if you explained yourself perfectly, there would still be people who would misinterpret you, judge you, reject you. Universal approval is a fantasy, and pursuing fantasies is the fastest way to waste your real life. So, how to apply this practically? First, identify your explanation triggers. In what situations do you feel a compulsive need to justify yourself? With what type of person do you lose control and start talking too much? These are your weak points, where your energy leaks and your authority dies. Second, practice the power of pause. When someone questions you, breathe. Count to 3 before responding. Ask yourself, does this person deserve an explanation? Does this situation require justification? Or can I simply maintain my position without lowering myself? Third, develop standard responses for common situations. Instead of long explanations, use phrases like, I understand your point of view. That's how I see the situation. That's my decision for now. They're not rude, but they also don't open space for unnecessary debate. Fourth, accept being misunderstood. This is the hardest part, but also the most liberating. Not everyone will understand your choices, and that's okay. You're not responsible for others' capacity for comprehension. You're only responsible for living with integrity and authenticity. Fifth, observe your emotions when you resist the temptation to explain yourself. Initially, you'll feel anxiety, guilt, fear that people will form wrong opinions about you. But over time, these emotions transform into something much more powerful. Confidence. Confidence that you can exist without needing constant approval. Confidence that your value doesn't depend on others' understanding. And this confidence, ironically, makes people understand and respect you more than any explanation ever achieved. Here's the truth that will shock you. The people who explain themselves most are usually the least understood, because excessive explanation signals insecurity, and insecurity generates distrust. When you explain yourself too much, People start questioning whether you really believe what you're saying. They start looking for inconsistencies, for hidden motivations, for signs that you're not being completely honest. Not because you're not being honest, but because defensive behavior makes people automatically enter investigative mode. It's like when someone says, "I'm not racist," but the simple fact of needing to deny already plants the seed of doubt. Similarly, when you need to constantly explain your motivations, people start suspecting your motivations aren't as pure as you claim. It's a cruel paradox. The more you try to prove your integrity through explanations, the less people believe in it. On the other hand, when you act with integrity, without explaining yourself, people can feel this authenticity. They may not understand all your decisions, but they respect the fact that you make them with conviction, and respect is worth much more than comprehension, because comprehension can be temporary and superficial, but respect creates a solid foundation for genuine relationships. I'll share something I discovered by observing truly effective leaders. They have one quality in common: economy of words combined with weight of presence. When they speak, every word has intention. There's no filler, no unnecessary explanations, no attempts to anticipate and prevent every possible misunderstanding. They simply communicate their truth and allow others to decide what to do with that information. And this approach makes them infinitely more memorable and impactful than people who speak 3 times more but say much less. Because when your words are scarce, they automatically gain more weight. People pay more attention. They reflect more on what you said. They remember more of what you communicated. It's the same principle that makes a whisper in a noisy room more effective than a shout. Contrast draws attention. Scarcity creates value, and mystery maintains interest. When you master this economy of communication, you discover a power most people will never experience: the power of being truly heard, not just politely listened to. And here, we reach the final transformation point. When you implement these changes, when you stop compulsively explaining yourself, when you become selective with your words, when you accept being misunderstood without trying to correct every incorrect perception, something profound happens in your psyche. You become a natural magnet for people who value authenticity. You attract individuals who respect inner strength, who admire someone who doesn't need constant validation to function. And you automatically repel people who only know how to relate through manipulation, drama, or emotional need. It's as if you installed an invisible filter that separates genuine relationships from parasitic connections. The right people approach, the wrong people distance themselves. And for the first time in life, you realize you don't need to fight to maintain healthy relationships. They simply happen naturally when you're being genuinely yourself, without masks, without desperate explanations, without attempts to control how others perceive you. Here's what will happen when you implement this. Initially, you'll feel uncomfortable, almost guilty. People around you will find the change strange. Some will even attack, trying to force you back to the old pattern. But after a few weeks, you'll notice conversations became more interesting. People pay more attention when you speak, because you no longer speak carelessly. Your relationships became more balanced, because you're no longer in the position of always justifying yourself. And, most importantly, you'll feel more in control of your own life, because you're no longer outsourcing your self-esteem to others' opinions. You'll discover that being a bit enigmatic, a bit less available, a bit more selective with your words doesn't make you a worse person. It makes you a more respected, more valued, more magnetic person, because in a world where everyone is shouting to be heard, those who speak little and well naturally become more interesting. And you'll also